Prepare to be illuminated.
In today's video, we're going to be looking at the World Eaters deck. Now the World Eaters are a very popular faction in this game, and for good reason. They do great damage, they've got great abilities, and they're very easy and forgiving to build. The World Eaters, like all legions, have 4 Warlords. And unlike all legions, for the World Eaters, actually all 4 are pretty good in their own way. Let's start with Angeron. Angeron is the most popular of all of the Warlords in the game. You will see a lot of Angerons at all levels, especially towards the higher end of the ladder. And he's popular for great reason. He has fantastic abilities. Let's look at him. So first of all, and this is less important, although it can have consequences, he has Berserk, which means Angeron must attack somebody every single turn. That's usually okay, but sometimes it's not quite advantageous. Typically, that's if your enemies manage to play a unit with extremely high attack and front line, and you have no one else, Angeron must attack that unit. But compensating for that, Angeron's next ability is he has +1 attack when he has no troops in play. That means most Angeron decks tend to be focused around tactics or troops who are not expected to survive during a turn. And then lastly, like all the Chaos Primarchs, he has a Whispers of Chaos ability. We'll look at that in a moment. And Angeron's initiative is medium, so he has a pretty good chance of going first. Well, a pretty okay chance. Let's run down and take a look at that Whisper of Chaos. So let me just toggle to all cards and run down here. Alright, here's his Whisper of Chaos card, and at first it looks like he'll never get to play it because it costs 20 energy. Except it costs 0 energy when he's down to 1 health. So as Angeron, you can often engineer a situation either by strategically attacking enemies or by doing damage to your own self with abilities and cards for you to hit 1 health and then activate your Demon Prince form. So as Demon Prince Angeron, he is really strong. He's got this massive attack value, which is 4. It doesn't say it here, but he heals, I believe, 8 or 9 points when he becomes a demon as well. He still has Berserk, but now he also has Bloodthirst, so he can attack twice per turn, meaning he'll be doing at least 8 damage a turn, maybe more if you've got the right tactics already played. And lastly, he cannot be stunned, so he's always doing that damage. So it's a pretty handy ability. It's relatively easy to trigger as well, and it's one of the more common Whispers of Chaos you'll see getting triggered. Alright, let's go back up and take a look at some of the others. The next best or next most commonly seen Warlord is actually Erlin, the most easily available World Eaters Warlord. And at first, from his stats, it doesn't really look obvious why. He's just got the same 2 damage and 30 health as all the base Warlords. He does start with an extra card, which is handy, but he's heavily favored because of these latter 2 abilities. First of all, his energy ability is really cool. You spend 2 energy and you deal a massive 3 damage to the enemy Warlord without taking any damage himself. So that actually compensates quite a lot for his low health, relatively speaking. Secondly, he has high initiative, meaning he will often go first he'll definitely go first if your enemy has medium or low initiative, and he has a 50% chance of going first if you have high initiative. So he'll get the first blow in, start to take board control, and so on. The one problem with Erlin is because he only has 30 health, to be competitive at the top you need to have a deck with all of the right cards. If you don't have like a lot of the key legendary cards and rare and epic cards, Erlin doesn't perform well at the top. But you'll see at the high end of the ladder there's a lot of players who have Erlin and they love playing with him. Next best is Kharn. Kharn is the epic warlord. Is one of the epic warlords. He's got 2 attack and 35 health like they all do, but here's his key ability. He has Bloodthirst, meaning he can attack twice a turn, making him the only warlord who can always attack twice per turn. And then the second part, which is a blessing and a curse, is after attacking he deals 1 damage to a random unit on the board. This could be an enemy troop, it could be the enemy warlord, it could also be one of your own troops, or it can actually be yourself as well. So although you can attack twice, you may end up just bludgeoning yourself down. The nice thing with Karn though is because of this ability to attack twice, he can throw out a lot of damage, which makes games run really quickly, which is why he's popular. And also, he's very strong during the lower parts of the ladders. Karn is quite easy to rise up the ladder with, so I personally use Karn to get up to around 2300, 2400 ranking, and then he sort of struggled as he came up against better decks. You tend to not see that many Karns at the high end of the ladder, just because his ability does not start to translate well against decks which are very strong. So Karn is great until the end game. He also has medium initiative, which is average. So he has an average chance of going first. Alright, and the last one is Shabran Dar. So Shabran Dar for a long time has kind of been the unwanted stepchild of the World Eaters. A lot of people would like to have used him, but thought he didn't quite build well. But it's because he has a different play style to the rest of the World Eaters. The other World Eater Warlords are more about direct face damage, hitting the enemy Warlord in particular really hard and fast. Shabran Dar is about hitting hard and fast, but he hits the enemy troops. He is the king of AoE damage. Raven Guard will hate playing against him. Recently, players have started figuring out, especially one player, Orthanol, figured out a great deck to play as Shabran Dar, and he's also competitive now at the high end of the ladder. So all four Warlords for... oh, and just to talk through his ability, you spend 2 energy and you only deal 1 damage to the enemy Warlord for that, but you do 2 damage to adjacent troops. And that makes it easy together if you build your deck with lots of other tactics and units which do area damage. It makes it easy to keep the enemy's army under control, which lets your own army kill the enemy. Alright, so that's our 4 Warlords done. Let's go through the actual cards and run through my opinion on them all. Number 1, Drask Scouts. These are actually extremely popular. They're a great card. It's a handy way of spending 1 energy when you have it left, because when these guys die, and they will definitely die, you get to draw a card. And making sure you draw cards, I keep saying this in every video, it's important, because if you run out of cards, you will lose the game. Not because of any mechanic, it's just that you won't have the right card, you won't be able to play the right troops and tactics for the right situations. So if you're running low and if your hand size is getting really small every turn, you don't want to be there. These guys will help you out to avoid that. Next up is Gladiator Group 27. So this is a tactic. It gives all troops in your hand drop pod, meaning when they get deployed, they start off in a drop pod which will take the first 2 or more points of damage they take, and then they start taking damage. This sounds great. It's an average ability, usually because many of the World Eaters decks will not have a really heavy number of troops in them, and therefore you'll only often be able to buff 1 or 2 units with this. When it works though, it can work really well. So this is an okay card to have, but you're not going to see it that often. Strike and Fade. This is incredibly popular. It has its obvious use for finishing off damaged enemies, and it has an extra bonus in that it lets you draw a card. So that sounds pretty cool already, because again it helps make sure your hand stays full. But World Eaters also can use it in a couple other ways. You have a couple of legendary cards like Wrath and Arga's Braund, who gain bonuses when they take any damage. So you can use Strike and Fade to hit your own guys to trigger their ability. And quite a lot of the times you'll see when an Angeron player is on 2 health, he'll hit himself with Strike and Fade and turn into his demon form. So this card is used in many World Eaters decks. Cardok. This is actually a nice little healing card. It only costs 2 energy and it heals 2 to every single one of your units. This one gets used all the way through the ladder. It's a good card. Keth Bikes. This guy gets used more so as a finishing tactic than as a unit. As a unit, his stats are okay. You normally wouldn't recommend him for just his stats though. 2 energy, but he only has 1 point of health. But because he deals 1 point of damage to all enemies, he's very popular to have in decks as a finishing move. So you'll damage an enemy unit, maybe a health 3 enemy unit with your Warlord, taking it down to 1 point of health left, and then you drop Keth Bikes and you finish them off. Especially if you drop 2 of these at once, then it's 2 points of damage you do to everyone. And if your enemy needs to, we will probably try to waste energy or unit actions finishing them off, because they will also do an extra 2 points of damage the next turn. Learn Squad, these guys are actually pretty handy. Stats wise, their attack looks pretty poor, but you don't have them for their attack. You have them for this big health, meaning they'll stick around and make the enemy warlord think twice about attacking directly. You can also combo these with some other cards which come up later, which will give them boosts, and that'll suddenly turn them into strong combat units. So we'll see that in a moment when you see Swooping Advance. Stall Squad, this is just so-so. It's an average unit. It has enough health to survive for a turn after you drop it most of the time, and it has Unstoppable, meaning the enemy cannot really defend against it with a frontline unit, but it's just sort of strictly average. There's nothing great about this card. Sweeping Advance, on the other hand, is critical in just about every single World Eater's deck. If you have this card, you will include it in your deck. It's a tactic. It gives +3 attack to a friendly troop. So I already mentioned how you can use it on Learn Squad over here to turn them from a lackluster stats of 1 attack, 4 health to being a devastating unit with 4 attack and 4 health. So that's one way to use it. They work really well with Goldstone's Hunters from the Imperial Army, because they turn Goldstone's Hunters suddenly into a fast unit which does 6 damage and which the enemy cannot defend against with frontline units. They also go together with another unit you'll see later on, Land Speeders from the World Eaters deck, which are attack 4. So with their base attack 4, this card turns them into an attack 7, making them hit extra hard. So this card is fantastic, one of the key ones in the World Eaters deck. Throne of Skulls. This looks good at first glance, but often it's not used. If you look at its ability, it gives a Mark of Chaos, which is great, and Berserk, which is kind of pointless, to your Space Marines. But most of the time, World Eaters will not have that many Space Marines on the board. Berserk is not really that huge of a buff, and so essentially it's 2 energy to give your guys a Mark of Chaos when most often you only have 1 or 2 guys on the board. It's not worth it. You'd hardly ever see it. Same with Aggressive Tactics. This one looks great, except it only draws a card for each damaged enemy. So most of the time you're not going to have that many enemies on the board who are damaged at once, and so it's not going to help you draw too many cards. Not worth it for its energy cost. Lorx Squad. You tend to see these guys used a fair bit. They cost 3 energy. They do have Berserk, so they have to attack every turn. They have a Rage ability, meaning every time they take damage from any source, they deal 1 damage to a random unit. That random unit is what makes these a little less preferred than some of the than an alternative, which I'll talk about in a moment when I reach the 4 energy units. Some people like Lorx Squads. I do not like Lorx Squad. So yeah, try it, see it, but I don't really recommend this guy, because that random damage might hurt something really important to you. Butcher's Nails. This one is sort of similar to the one we just saw earlier. It boosts all this Astartes, so Space Marines, which are in your hand. It's just that, again, most World Eaters decks won't necessarily pull in all that many Astartes into your hand at once, so getting the right circumstances to get the right mileage out of this one can be a bit hard, so I think this one is a pass. Crashed Bikes. These guys love drop pods, because when you drop these guys, your enemy will try to kill them. So if you do have Gladiator Group 27 in your hand, save them until you can use it with Crashed Bikes. The reason why these guys are so good is look at their stats. 3 energy, 3 attack, 3 health. That's actually just average for the course, but they have Bloodthirst, meaning if they start their turn and they're on full health, they'll probably be able to attack twice during their turn, dealing out a whopping 6 damage. So this is a great card. It's just that your enemy will try to kill them before they get to do much. So I like them. I think it's above average for the deck. You'll see them used quite a fair bit, but they become priority target. Alright, Cirque Landspeeder, these are in every single World Eater's deck. You must include them. They're a unit, but they're essentially a tactic, which is deal 4 damage to anyone, because there's very few things they can attack without dying. They have fast, so as soon as you drop them on the board, you can attack immediately, or even better, you drop them on the board, you buff them with sweeping advance, and they become 7 damage. You will actually see a lot of World Eaters players sit on Cirque Landspeeder until the very end of the game, because they'll let their enemy, they'll collect both Cirque Landspeeders in their hands, and they'll also collect at least one sweeping advance, and on turn 8, when their enemy is sitting there feeling pretty happy because he's got like 11 health or 13 health or something like that left, they'll suddenly drop both Cirque Landspeeders, buff them with sweeping advance, and suddenly hit for 11 damage from 2 of these guys in sweeping advance alone, and then finish you off with a Warlord. So these guys are fantastic. They can also be used to bail you out of trouble, because a lot of the times a really powerful unit from the enemy will be left on 4 health, and then you can just drop these guys and make the finishing move. These guys hate front line though. They do not have unstoppable, so units with front line will stop these guys in their tracks, so watch out for that. Seditions Gate. This is also extremely popular, gets used all the way through the ladder. What it does is you choose one of your units to die, and a random enemy troop will die as well. This typically gets saved until you reach the point where the enemy Warlord is on the board and he has one incredibly powerful unit next to him and nothing else. And then you just drop your weakest unit onto the board, you play Seditions Gate, and that powerful enemy unit will be destroyed. It combos really well with Drask Scouts, because for 4 energy you can drop Drask Scout, then use Seditions Gate on them to destroy them and an enemy, and when these got destroyed you get to draw a card yourself. Braund Veterans. These guys are pretty good, but they only fit well with a Harn deck. He's the only Warlord who can really get good mileage out of that. With Angeron, although Angeron attacks the enemy directly often, you don't want a unit sticking around for long, because Angeron gets that attack buff when he has no friendly units on his side, and with 4 health, Braund Veterans will often stick around for quite a while. So not so great for Angeron, also not great for Shabrandar or Erlin, because both those Warlords are usually using their energy ability to damage the enemy Warlord, and they're not attacking directly, so Lorx Squad's ability here, which is gain +1 attack, will rarely get triggered by those guys. So but on the other hand, Harn, who's attacking twice a turn, will buff these guys like crazy. So great for Harn, not so great for anyone else. Lorx Squad. So these are the guys who I prefer instead of the Lorx Squad, because Lorx Squad deal 1 damage to a random enemy unit whenever they take attack. Lorx Squad deals 1 damage to a random enemy, so your own guys will never get hit. They have the same attack and health. They also have unstoppable, so they ignore frontline. But most importantly with these guys, that random point of damage they inflict will only go on the enemy. So I prefer these over Lorx Squad. No survivors. This is awesome. Most other decks will use a card from the Chaos deck called Artillery Strike, which will do 2 damage to 3 random enemies for 4 energy. No survivors, on the other hand, for the same energy cost, it deals 2 damage to everyone, no matter how many there are. And on top of that, for every unit that's killed, it gives a free Mark of Chaos to a friendly non-demon troop. So this is actually great when you get to combo it. Let's say if the enemy has lots of weak units, you drop a unit and then you play no survivors, you'll buff the hell out of the guy you just dropped. So no survivors is great, definitely include it. It has a position in every single World Eaters deck. Wrath. This guy is great. It's one of the best legendary cards. On his own, he's pretty handy. He does have Berserk, and he does have this great rage ability, which is whenever he takes any damage at all, be it fatal damage or just 1 point of damage, you put 1 copy of Wrath's Berserkers in plays, which is these guys. 4 attack, 4 health. So what a lot of World Eaters players will do is they'll drop Wrath and then they'll hit him with, let's go up here, Strike and Fade, and that's going to immediately do 1 point of damage to him, which will generate a unit of Wrath's Berserkers, and when the enemy destroys Wrath or he attacks again next turn, you'll get another unit of the Berserkers. So potentially with Wrath, for spending 4 energy, you'll get like 8 energies worth of people popping out. So he is really good. The one downside with Wrath is he has Berserk, so he must attack. And Alpha Legion players will be watching out for Wrath to come, and then they'll just drop the Gamma order on him. So whenever he attacks the Alpha Legion Warlord, he'll attack your own Warlord. So just watch out for that. Wrath's Berserkers, I just talked about. They're average stats for what they are, but the fact that they get dropped free with Wrath is incredible. You will rarely see these guys actually on their own in a World Eater's deck. You'll see them getting played a lot, but they're getting generated from Wrath. In the early ladder, these guys are worth playing just for their stats. Like while you're on Prospero, by the time you start reaching Mars, they're getting a bit outclassed by other 4 energy units with better abilities, such as the Roth Landspeeder. This has 3 attack, 4 health, but it has cleave 3, meaning whenever it attacks a target, the enemy to the left and right of that target will also take 3 points of damage. So it's really doing 9 points of damage per turn. It has enough health to have a good chance of surviving, so it's a good card to have. The one thing with the Landspeeder is because of its high health, it sees little use in Karn decks. Sorry, not Karn decks, in Angeron decks, because Angeron does not want units to be surviving. Alright, Argus Braund. This guy is incredible. He can become one of the most powerful units in the game. He has Berserk, meaning he must attack, but every time he takes any damage at all, you double his attack value permanently. So, I've had this guy get up to easily 30 or 40 attack. Just watch out, the enemy will be trying to figure out ways to kill him in one turn before he gets a chance to attack, or the enemy will be trying to get him to take his anger out on units with front line. Again, watch out if you're against Alpha Legion, because he has Berserk. Alpha Legion will love to play special orders on him and force him to attack you. So be careful. Alright, Gorechild. This one is an interesting looking one. At first it looks amazing, like give +1 attack to your Warlord, but then consider the fact that Erlin and Shabrandar will generally not be attacking directly. That means Gorechild is fantastic if your Warlord is Karn or if your Warlord is Angeron, but if it's not one of those, you probably do not want to include Gorechild in your deck. If you do have Angeron or Karn, these guys must be in your deck because it's going to give you a big advantage. When you consider with one Gorechild, Angeron's base attack, assuming he has no units deployed, will be 4, and with 2 Gorechilds, because you can have 2 copies of this card in your deck, Angeron will actually go up to 5 attack. Also, Gorechild will allow Karn to reliably do more damage to the enemy than he will receive, so it's great for Karn as well. Lorx Squad. These guys have average stats for 5 energy. They are unstoppable. You'll see these a lot in the early ladder with World Eaters because they're an easy card to get. You see them less and less higher up on the ladder because there are better ways of spending 5 energy. Exactly the same thing applies to Monument for Horn. Its main disadvantage is it's a 5 energy temporary buff. I see temporary because it only applies while this guy is alive and your enemy will try to kill him. He is tough to kill, but most important, this is adjacency ability. He gives neighboring units +2 attack, which can be very powerful. It's just that for 5 energy you're getting a unit which cannot attack or protect you, so it's a bit questionable. Also, Angeron will definitely not want this guy because it's going to last for probably a while and therefore not allow him to get his increased attack. Seditions Squad. I love this card. These guys have 6 health, so they're likely to stick around for a while, and their ability is great. It deals 3 damage to an enemy and adjacent units. That's 9 damage they can inflict without taking any damage back themselves. They're a great area of effect tool, so I like them. Again, they do not fit well with Angeron decks because these guys, you want them to stay alive, and Angeron needs his units to die, so he gets buffed. So, apart from Angeron, I generally like to include Seditions Squad. Alright, next up we have Armor of Mars. This is a great legendary card. It's the only healing card which you can use over and over and over again. It heals 7 to your Warlord, and then if you have no troops, which is the situation Angeron likes to be in and Karn often finds himself in, you return it to your hand, and then its cost increases by 1. That increase caps out at 10 energy, so it basically is a perpetual heal. Once you start doing that though, because most of the time you can play very few other cards once you've done Armor of Mars, just watch out, because your enemy will be trying to put enough units on the board to basically outmatch the healing you're doing. But it's a great healing card. Late in the game, it can make a huge difference and help turn it around. Gorefather. This is a card which at first glance looks incredible. It gives cleave 2 to your Warlord, meaning your Warlord will do 2 damage to the enemies to the left and right of its target. That's okay. Angeron often is just, by the time you reach 6 energy, Angeron is trying to finish off the enemy Warlord, so cleave often doesn't help him as much as something else for 6 energy or 5 energy. Karn, on the other hand, with his 2 attacks a turn, can absolutely really leverage cleave. So I would say Gorefather is essential in Karn decks. It's okay in Angeron decks, and again, Erlin and Shabrandar, who are not doing direct attacks with their Warlord, they're not really going to benefit from Gorefather, so skip it out in decks for Erlin and Shabrandar. Alright, who do we have up next? Alright, now we've got a couple of 6 energy troops. They're all okay. Hidden Strength I personally think is the weakest, just because it's 6 in energy and it has 6 health but only 3 attack. Its rage ability looks okay, although it will have a maximum of 2 troops nearby, but it will buff them permanently every time it takes damage. But that's a very conditional usage. What if you don't have any other troops when this thing comes up? So I don't like using it for that reason. Lorx is my preferred one. He's got these reliable stats: 6 energy, he does 6 damage, 6 health, and he does 2 damage to everyone when he dies. So a lot of the times by the time Lorx is coming out, you're hopefully applying pressure to kill the enemy Warlord, and him dying will help you to do that. The other alternative option is more Terminators. Whenever these guys get damaged, they will gain +1 attack. So they can become pretty powerful pretty quickly, but just the circumstances, whether or not you get a chance to actually get them buffed up really highly before they get killed, is questionable, because late in the game, by the 6 energy turn and later, there's a lot of units getting put on the board which do a ton of damage, and more Terminators early on may not do that much damage to units before they die. Alright, and then getting into the last couple of cards here. Dort is the Dreadnought for the World Eaters. I don't like it because of that rage ability. It's random damage, so it might harm you. Also, again, 7 energy, there's often better things to do in your turns with 7 or more energy than spend it on a Dreadnought which does random damage. For the Blood God, some people like this, I don't. If you remember, take No Survivors does No Survivors does 2 damage to all of the enemy cards for 4 energy, all the enemy units for 4 energy. This guy does 2 damage to everyone. It does 2 damage to the enemy units, enemy Warlord, does 2 damage to your units and to your Warlord. If it kills 5 or more troops, you do get a free Slayer of Worlds, which is 15 attack, 15 health. It does have 7 maintenance, so then you're not doing much else in your turns. The big beef I have with this is that it's really hard to engineer a situation where you're going to get to trigger its ability. So most of the time it gets used as a 7 energy card, which is doing 2 damage to everyone, which is not that great. So I think this one's a pass. Macer Varin is the legendary infantry or legendary space marine for World Eaters. He is kind of underpowered. He's one of the least popular legendaries in the game, because again, like, his stats are nothing incredible off the board, and it really relies on other units dying in order to get good. It's hard to reliably use him, so he gets a pass. Merciless, on the other hand, this card is generally great all round. It's critical for Angeron decks though, because this will be one of the ways in which Angeron will engineer a situation in which he turns into a Demon Prince. If Angeron ever ends up on 4 health, he can use Merciless to do 3 damage to everyone on the board, including himself, and then turn into a demon and attack. So, and also as an extra bonus, every time you kill a unit, you draw a card. So Merciless is really good. Angeron decks will always have 2 of them, and they can be handy in other decks like Erlin and so on. If you're in the lead, or the enemy, like let's say in your last turn, you've got 9 or more energy, the enemy has 6 health, you can drop Merciless and then use Erlin's ability to finish a target. So it's a pretty solid card. It's a good general board clearing card as well. Blade of Fury is next. You hardly ever see these getting played. They're just kind of underwhelming for their stats. You pay 8 energy to play them, and then the next turn you spend 4 energy and you deal 3 damage to everyone. So it's sort of an upgrade on Lorx Squad that we saw earlier. It's just really expensive in terms of energy cost to pull off. So very few players tend to use Blade of Fury. 4 cards left, so let's look at Gauss. So this is a Space Marine squad, a Starting squad. Same issue as before. They have a high energy cost. Their rage ability is okay, but most of the time the 8 energy slot in a World Eater deck will be taken up by the next card here, the Conqueror. This is a full board clear. It'll get rid of all the enemy troops, no matter how powerful they are, or no matter if they have Survivor or whatever. It does also destroy your own troops, but Angeron doesn't care about that. The Conqueror is great late game, just for destroying the enemy's army and forcing him to start again. So this card really takes it tends to dominate the high cost cards in a World Eater deck. Honor's Retribution. This is okay. Again, probably the main reason you don't see it much is that the Conqueror is a much better card than this. So stats wise these are okay, their abilities okay, they're a little low on health, but the biggest issue is they're competing for a position in your deck with the Conqueror. And pretty much the same applies for Battle's Glory. This one is a bit more usable because it has frontline and shield, meaning the enemy must attack it, but the first attack gets ignored. It has enough health to take a beating and enough attack to do a lot of damage to whoever attacks it. Battle's Glory gets used quite a fair bit in World Eater decks lower down in the ladder when people are just trying to fill up space, and its ability is really hard to counter. But once you reach Mars and you're on to Terra, then Battle's Glory has no position. There's just too many cards which deal with it pretty well. Alright, so that's a run through of the World Eaters deck. My next how to do a deck building guide will be talking through a deck for Erlin, which the type of deck which works high up on the ladder, so you can get a feel for how his style works. So stay tuned for that, subscribe, and you'll get notified when that video comes out. Until then, have fun playing, guys. Bye.